stopped him. I need to think about my family.
Your job is to wrestle.
Live up to that deal, or we are through.
I told you to look out for him!
I just love being out there with you guys. It's the only thing that matters to me.
The Bonner will forever be the greatest family in the history of wrestling.
I know you grew up a fan of the Von Erichs. You knew this story. I'm interested in, really particularly the desire to make a movie about them. It's not an easy subject to make a movie about. So what was the impulse specifically to do it this way?
Well, I don't like to try and make easy movies, so not that there are any easy movies, but I think it just touched on all of the things I was interested in and have, furthering themes I've explored in earlier films about family, why we believe what we believe, where we come from, questioning where we come from, but it's also about sports and athleticism, which is something I've always wanted to explore, and wrestling in particular was a world that I feel doesn't get portrayed often and doesn't get portrayed well often, which is also something that draws me to making films. It's like if I feel like I can bring a new light to it or more depth to something, I'm drawn to do so. And I think with wrestling in particular, I hadn't really seen, these guys are in the ring and they are acting out the highest highs, the lowest lows, acts of injustice. It's like a full range of huge emotions, but when they go home or they go backstage, the sort of box they're put in as men is to keep their emotions inside. And that was something that really I connected to, and something I felt was important to explore, even if this is an extreme version of that. Feels like something that feels very important.
Mm-hmm. In terms of working on the screenplay, can you talk about really figuring the structure of this movie out? I mean, given the really just tragic nature of the story, I would imagine there was a lot of nuance to be found within those beats and figuring out exactly how to get from point to point here.
Yeah, I mean, when I first, because I knew a certain amount from childhood, and I remembered a certain amount, but really, as a filmmaker, as I started to do research and look into it and sort of lay out the timelines and as many facts as I could gather, which in the world of wrestling, it's hard to find facts. There's a lot of gossip, there's a lot of myth, and so that in itself was one thing. But basically, what I was looking at was this epic Greek tragedy. It was, of mythical proportion, so it was more, what do you include? How do you include it? How do you find the core of the story? And it was just making those tough decisions along the way of what to include.
So how did you think about casting broadly? I know you didn't necessarily go in with any expectations of a physical regimen. Obviously, I needed to train in the wrestling department, but what were you looking for emotionally?
I always just look for something. I don't know. It's an instinctual thing. It's sort of one thing that allows me to see the person in the role, and sometimes it'll come from seeing them in something else, or it could come through the casting process. And it's usually confirmed in a conversation of just meeting someone and just energetically feeling that they have the thing, and trusting that they are the person for it.
So Zach, can you talk about meeting Sean and that initial discussion about this pretty demanding, intense part?
Remember meeting Sean for the first time in New York and he basically told me a story that was the backdrop of wrestling, but really underneath it was a really beautiful story about loss, and about family and the lengths that one man is willing to go for the people that he loves. There's something instinctual about it. I really enjoyed the way Sean talked about making a movie and about the characters, the nuance that he was excited about in telling this story that's fascinating, and so fun to engage on. It's all on the page, and I know it's in his mind, but kind of excavating it just seemed like a really, really fun and challenging undertaking.
Especially with Kevin, the emotional load is really dramatic. How did you find stepping into that, holding that on set? Was it difficult, painful to kind of go through those scenes and that whole process during the shoot?
The physical prep was probably the most grueling part of all of it. That literally was painful. There was no way around it. All the wrestling and just the getting into Kevin's body was really challenging. I mean, it was months of training and, you know, just preparation and really focusing in a way that I had never done before for any role. The other really fascinating thing in talking with Sean about you know, Kevin's position in the family and this very interesting trait, which was that he didn't really excel in the limelight. That really wasn't where he shined. He was just electric as a wrestler. But in the showmanship quality, that was something that didn't necessarily come naturally to him. And I thought that was a really cool color. Also, just the ability to get with these guys, these really fantastic actors, and work out a complicated, sad, but ultimately really beautiful family story was really exciting.
Jeremy, you come into the film a little bit later, and are thrust really back into this family dynamic, this wrestling world, pretty abruptly. How did you think about Carrie's arc in the film and that particular moment when you do take center stage before, of course, things start to go very wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the story of the Von Erichs, there's so much like sort of like destiny and fate and tragedy and all of these things. And oftentimes I would think about the brothers like other possible paths. You know, for Carrie, it was the Olympics. For Kevin, it could have been football at a time. And yeah, it seems like that they were all drawn into this thing and very much led there by their father. And I think their identity got so tied up in wrestling, and then therefore like all sort of approval and self-worth for a period, I think, was then attached to each other, but also you know, also Fritz. So it's interesting to think about, you know, I guess what could have been, you know, for these men. Yeah.
And Stanley, with Mike, he's a very different person physically, even. So how did you think about the kind of space you would take up in this movie and the way this character was in this movie?
The music scene was something that I was working on for a minute, and I think that really grounded me. I was playing a lot of guitar, just on offset, you know, going back to what you were saying before about like the familial bond. I mean, like I think that you kind of saw it like in the garage. They were working out, and I was sitting down drawing in my notebook. Those scenes were, I don't know, they kind of they grounded me and grounded the character, and I think that I don't, you know, Mike, at least in the film, wasn't necessarily the most physically you know, adept, but I think that his love for his brothers really spoke to me, and hopefully I let that shine in the film.
Holt, I want to go to you and really get your perspective on the patriarch of this family, on Fritz. There is this feeling as the tragedies mount, and there's a lot of silence in those scenes, and you carry that. And I'm just curious how you thought of him and how he was feeling as the film progressed, and how you wanted to play it.
You know, if you read the so-called wrestling experts and you listen to the podcasts and you watch some of the documentaries, you'll hear a lot of people say a lot of very disparaging things about Fritz, that he was controlling, that he exploited family tragedy for commercial gain. I think that's a gross oversimplification of, you know, who the guy really was. I remember seeing a brief clip after Kevin Von Erich saw the film for the first time. And he said, you know, I didn't think they'd be able to find an actor to play Fritz, but they found one. And that meant more to me than any review from any critic could have meant.
Especially because you mentioned earlier not loving all past depictions of wrestling. So on a really technical level, like, what kind of feel did you want to create, and how did you go about accomplishing that?
Every wrestling scene was shot with the emotion in mind. So we would block it and plan the camera moves the same way we would as if it was a dinner scene, making the emotional decisions about the camera that best serve it without getting too caught up in the action and the stunts and stuff. And so one of the things that I asked of all of these guys was that they could wrestle the entire match so that we could go through the full emotion of whatever it was they were performing or, feeling underneath the performance, so that we could capture it.
You can definitely feel that you guys did that.
Yeah, that was a little more challenging than a dinner scene.
Fair enough. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.